Yeah, what I'm going to be doing today is a tier list of 29 horror franchises, and I'm going to be rating them based on how I feel about their future. Think of it as like a investment type situation where if you had a chance to invest in this project, how confident would you be in putting your money towards that franchise? And how confident do you think that that franchise will continue moving forward? So I would think it's kind of self-explanatory. Again, this is based on confidence moving forward. So the tippy top, the S tier, is too big to fail. It's a franchise where their next movie could kind of be a dud, and it really wouldn't matter because there's going to be another one after that. Some of those are kind of self-explanatory if you've followed horror in the last 40 years. Next tier down is House Money. Not quite as strong as Too Big to Fail, but still, they could afford to have a mistake. Still quite a revered franchise otherwise. Next tier down is Need a Hit. Probably a franchise that's alive, maybe not that popular, but to sustain their limited popularity, they need a hit. Next one down, time for a remake. Hey, if you've got an unsuccessful or a flailing horror franchise, do a remake. And that's what this tier is. And lastly, but not leastly, curtains. How much confidence do I have in the franchise moving forward? I don't. Pull the plug. That is my confidence. This isn't based on any sort of quality of the franchise. This is just the zeitgeist, how the franchise lives and how successful it is. Whether or not the films are good sometimes does not matter, because some of these things live and some of them are very successful and some of them aren't. First franchise is Godzilla. I'll count all versions of Godzilla because it's currently running in Japan, currently running in America, and doing well, like everywhere. They're low budget Godzilla minus one, and the big budgety Godzilla versus Kong, they do well. You don't need to speak English or speak Japanese to enjoy a big dinosaur running around and crushing things. I'm going to say Too Big to Fail. That thing's been around since the 50s in multiple countries. And it's funny that that character competes with itself. You know, you have one coming out from Japan, you have one coming out from America, and they both do well, and the better film doesn't do as well financially speaking. So that, I think that's hysterical. Even when it doesn't do well, it does well. So next is Insidious. I'm not entirely wowed by this franchise, but you know, if we're talking about the future and what the numbers say, there's something there. It seems like since 2010, my idea of what a horror staple is not what it is anymore. And I always thought Insidious was part of the Conjuring universe. Silly me. I guess because it's what's-his-face in it. But I'm going to say, if there's another Insidious moving forward, it needs a hit. I don't know if it's at the forefront on anybody's tongues, so to speak, but as far as I'm concerned, I have it in need a hit. If you have anything that you disagree with, by all means, let me know. Here's another one that the franchise has probably gotten stronger over time, and the better stuff is probably in the past. This is Hannibal Lecter. I keep meaning to see the TV series with Mads Mikkelsen, and I've heard nothing but fantastic things about it. This is based, you know, I'm counting the television series stuff, but this is mostly if they were to do another film. I would, for the basis of keeping the IP moving forward for the film's sake, I would say time for a remake. I would reinvigorate Mads Mikkelsen, have him be Hannibal Lecter. I need to catch up with the television series. You have a face that people recognize to the character, so it doesn't necessarily need to be a hit, but just as far as the film franchise is concerned, as far as the movie-going public is concerned, they need to associate that face with the franchise moving forward. And that is my opinion. Okay, here we go, guys. As talked about in the chat earlier, Leprechaun, this kind of falls under that Puppet Master category of not exactly high quality stuff, not exactly expensive stuff, but it's people, they have enjoyment of it. This has had a remake of sorts, but I don't think Leprechaun will ever be a thing. I mean, obviously, I guess you could say time for a remake for it if they were to like take it in a different direction where it could be something of a mainstream success, but I just think it's more of this straight to DVD kind of jokey type thing. And I think it's over. You'll notice I didn't put the Amityville franchise here because it'll live on. People will keep putting the word Amityville in front of anything and call it horror. That IP is, I don't want to say successful. It lives, but as far as I'm concerned, as far as the populace is concerned, it's curtains. It's not very relevant anymore. Adam says, I can't remember if Leprechaun Origin's supposed to be a remake or was it a reboot. If I had watched it, I would be able to answer that. But wasn't it the wrestling guy that was Hornswoggle? Wasn't Hornswoggle the Leprechaun in that? But I don't know. I tapped on that franchise after The Hood. Next, I know I didn't want this to be so early, but it's here. We've gone the longest amount of time since the first Friday the 13th. Yeah, it's been 15 years since we've had a new Friday the 13th, and that's the longest it's been since this has been a franchise. I'm not going to say too big to fail. It's house money for me. If it were too big to fail, they would throw shit out at the wall and just, try things. If you're scared because the Blair Witch didn't do well, then you're not very confident in that franchise. And if you're not, why should I be? But in my opinion, they can throw out a new Friday the 13th or a remake or a reimagining, and it'll certainly get buzz and things. But considering we've been 15 years without it, as much as it pains me to say this, I don't think it's Godzilla levels of success where you can make one, fail, and keep going forward. We've had one Friday the 13th movie in 20 years. That's bad. Next, The Purge. What are we up to? 5 of these now? I want to say with the current political climate, this certainly not too big to fail, but it's certainly house money. They can make one that doesn't really work for everyone, but they can have a second chance at it after the unsuccessful whatever future release is, especially because those movies seem to be very poignant during certain administrations, and I think we'll get at least 1 or 2 purges over the next 4 years. Next, Final Destination. This franchise has always been entertaining to me. Even the crappy ones I find to some degree enjoyable. I don't know what my standards are for confidence and, moving forward past a next project, but I would say it's house money as well. I think Final Destination, you don't have, rest in peace, Tony Todd. But the thing about Final Destination is Tony Todd isn't the character for that franchise. As far as certain circles are concerned, he's something of a mascot for that franchise. But I think moving forward, you can have the non-star, the death itself, still carry on without leaning on a certain actor or character. And Grace is Devon Sawa, or it's a no-go. Okay, so The Collector, there's only 2 of them, and we're supposed to have a 3rd one by now. I don't know how very popular this is. Make sure Cody doesn't see this part. But I would say that this is something of a C-tier franchise. Not quite A, not quite B, not quite Leprechaun either. I would say it needs a hit. It needs a hit to reinvigorate itself and kind of make a name for itself where people maybe aren't familiar with it. Next, Predator, otherwise known as Predator, otherwise known as Prey. Bumpy road for this franchise, but Prey was good. It really was good, and considering that was made after The Predator, which is very divisive, I think it's house money, to be honest. I think the Predator franchise can afford to trip a little bit because they did. The Predator from 2018, 19, 17, whatever, it wasn't well received. And, they scaled things back and made Prey, and it's back to being enjoyed. Next, Saw. Yeah, we're up to our 11th version, which it should have been this year, but I give them all the credit in the world for delaying it and not being a stupid studio that just releases things because they told us a date a year and a half ago. I think Saw is too big to fail. Again, this isn't rating quality of the films or anything. It's confidence in the franchises being a thing moving forward. And I think Saw the future looks pretty bright, despite whatever they're going to do with their characters. That is this generation's Friday the 13th, this generation's Nightmare on Elm Street, because there's so many of them, and it's still quite present in anyone's discussions as far as present and future of horror franchises is concerned. We're concerned. Next, Hellraiser. Oh boy. So we had a remake. Forgive me, Hellraiser fans, but I would say this is like a D tier level franchise, normally speaking. If Friday the 13th is A, Texas Chainsaw Massacre is B, The Collector is C, I would say Hellraiser is D, but they just had a remake. I think moving forward, they need a hit. And that's like me being quite optimistic for that franchise. And I think it's mostly based on how the recent remake did. Speaking of Tony Todd, Candyman, which recently just had a remake. The pressure of redoing this franchise while having Tony Todd in the back of your mind, that is gone. You can officially try to do this with another actor. And yes, I'm fully aware that the remake, they did that. But I think without, the OG, the Tony Todd lingering over things, I think there's certainly a chance to move forward and do something and have a couple of sequels, a franchise. If you get past the fact that Tony Todd isn't here anymore, we're never going to get Tony Todd as Candyman again. I would say time for a remake. And yes, even though we just had a remake, Alien. I think the last three movies are certainly stronger than Resurrection, AVP, and AVP Requiem. I think as long as they don't spend $100 million making these things, I think it's something that you can kind of bank on. Do I want to say too big to fail or house money? It's definitely house money for me, because I feel like they can put out a miss and still be all right. Yeah, well, cautiously say house money. Oh, brother. Resident Evil, which that is Mila Jovovich in the image. We've recently had some sort of reimagining a video game proper love letter thing in Raccoon City. It's weird. The Mila Jovovich Resident Evil movies, they were kind of good for something. Like, you guaranteed that they were going to get attention. Whether or not it was positive attention is to be argued. But if I were to invest my money in that franchise, I would want a remake. Not quite curtains, because the video game franchise still lives pretty strongly. Wrong Turn. The remake was quite interesting, and you didn't need to have mountain people in it. I would say that if you make a sequel to the remake, you could go in a different direction. Like things like Wrong Turn, Leprechaun. I would even say Hellraiser to a degree. Those are franchises that they don't need to be box office successes. Just kind of have their loyal fans in the DVD watching universe. And I think Wrong Turn, with a hit going in the new direction and, steering away from the mountain people, I think if their next movie were a hit, you could have some more wide confidence in Wrong Turn sans mountain people. Next, Underworld. So Kate Beckinsale is making a whole lot of action movies. I've seen like 4 movies that she's made in the last 3 years suggested on Prime. But as far as Underworld is concerned, if Nosferatu is a hit, which I really think it will be, I think, the attention, the want, the need for a wide array of vampire movies might be back. We've finally have graduated on from the Twilight era, and maybe we can have a bit more fun with something like Underworld. But I would suggest maybe a remake. Give us a different character, or pass the torch, or something, because it's been a little bit. They kind of got a little silly towards the end there. Capitalize on horror being as good as it is, and make something that is horror action. I'll go at the bottom here. The Ring. This was suggested, and when the hell have we had a Ring movie recently? I guess, considering Smile appears to be working, and that's not on here. Smile is house money as far as I'm concerned. Just for that. But The Ring, I would say it needs a remake because that whole contagious horror thing, it's working with something like Smile, but I think Smile is certainly a much fresher, much more successful idea right now. And I don't know why The Ring is in this list, but not Smile. You dick. But yeah, for the sake of anybody who asks, Smile would be house money for me. Oh, so yeah, Grace is why though? It's already a remake that's not as good. It did very well here, and then the sequel didn't. I think if you were to, I don't know, reintroduce American audiences to something that hasn't been around for 20 years, especially with something like Smile doing as well as it is, I think there's a chance. It's almost at the bottom, Gray. I'm not saying that I would dump my bank account into producing the next thing, but it's just the name of the category, sir. Next, Evil Dead. I don't know why it gave me the most recent one. Evil Dead Rise is the image on there. Again, not quite at the tippy top as far as movie productions are concerned, and not quite a DVD mainstay. It's the first time we've had an Evil Dead since 2013, and it was quite good. I would, to make it be a consistent thing like we had in the 80s and early 90s, maybe need a hit. Next, Omen, which I still have not seen the first Omen, and as much as people are saying it's quite good, I believe everyone. I do. I just, in that franchise, I would say there's more misses than hits, and I will say that it needs a hit moving forward, even with the good vibes coming from the first Omen. Psycho. I don't know, if this were shortly after Bates Motel came out, it'd be a little bit easier to gauge. Again, using a television series to gauge my confidence in a film franchise. Bates Motel was well received. I don't want to say time for a remake. I would say if you spin off of Bates Motel and make a film, it would need to be a hit. And that's where that is. Look, I have a sideways middle finger on here. Next, VHS. Of this franchise, I've seen one of them, and it's not the most recent one. Another franchise that the fact that it doesn't have like a character, a mascot, so to speak, helps that you can kind of, sidestep any sort of failures or anything. And it's something that's quite frequent as far as, having a release every couple of years. So I would say house money. It's a franchise that I'm not familiar with well at all. I've only seen one of them, and they keep popping around. Again, there's some benefit to not having the character or the actor that's associated to it. It helps if things don't go well and you want to pivot. But yeah, I think VHS could afford to slip. Next, The Conjuring. When I looked into how many films are technically a part of the Conjuring franchise, I was shocked. And due to that umbrella, I'm going to say that The Conjuring is too big to fail. There's so many movies that are like offsprings of that original Conjuring film that, there's films that, I don't know, there's probably people that don't even know that some of these films, like myself, are tied to the Conjuring universe, like Annabelle, without seeing, I guess you see the Warrens in that film, but there are certainly movies that are a part of the Conjuring cinematic universe that people would be shocked to realize that, like, oh, they're all under this same umbrella. And for that reason, yeah, I think they could have the Conjuring Next Door Neighbor is a Creepy Guy edition, and it could fail, and they'll still make something else after that. So modern day horror, The Conjuring is somehow associated with something you've seen in the last 3 years. What do we have here? Where do I want to go? All right, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Not quite A tier. Another one of those doesn't really have any sort of voice in the theaters anymore, and isn't quite something that you would think of as direct to DVD, despite it being something of a streaming / Netflix mainstay. I think moving forward, there'll be a bunch of Texas Chainsaw Massacre movies. Whether or not I would have confidence in them, like reinvigorating the franchise to be part of the public discussion again, I don't have that kind of confidence. I'm going to say time for a remake, even though it's been remade a couple of times. Oh boy, Freddy Krueger, Nightmare on Elm Street, yet another big heavy hitter from the 80s. That, where is another Nightmare on Elm Street movie? What are you guys doing? The slasher that had that twist to it. Oh, he gets you in your dreams and in real life. Mr. Sandman with a fucked up twist on it. I don't understand what's going on. If this were a much less successful franchise, first of all, there hasn't been one in 14 years. I would say time for a remake again, but it's another house money movie franchise where we're not getting them. And like, that just shows that things like Jason Voorhees, Freddy Krueger, without having any films in the last decade and a half, they still can just throw something out there and be right back. Perhaps it's due to the back catalog, but Hellraiser's been a bit more fluid as far as releasing things is concerned, and it's nowhere near part of the conversation on a regular basis, despite having new content, whereas things like Freddy Krueger, Jason Voorhees, they still get talked about, despite being kind of old. If you're 18, if you're like the target age for a slasher, you were 4 when A Nightmare on Elm Street came out, the 2010 version. So in your lifetime, A Nightmare on Elm Street has been awful, but it's still part of the conversation. Wild. Let's do another one here. I don't know if there's technically a future. They called it a trilogy, but X, Pearl, Maxine, I would say that Maxine was a step down for that franchise, but it still did rather well, all things considered. I want to say house money. We don't even know if there's anything coming moving forward, but I don't think it's too big to fail. I think you can make another X universe movie, and if it misses, people will just kind of push it to the side. I know I'm a little hard on Ty West, and when I saw X and Pearl, I was like, man, where did this come from? And then Maxine was more of a, oh, okay. So broken clock syndrome, got it. But I would still say that something like X, Pearl, Maxine, that is house money. I think you could make one, have it be a little crummy, and there'd still be interest in another one. My opinion, of course. Oh, brother, where art thou? Chucky, Child's Play. As far as franchises are concerned, I would call it something of a B tier, but confidence moving forward. For a long time after Bride of Chucky, Seed of Chucky, it was good movie, weird choice. Then good movie, weird choice. Good movie, weird choice. And then the television series came out, and it was interesting take on things and bizarro shit. And then finally they broke that habit and just made 2 seasons together of bizarro shit. So much so that it didn't get picked up. And those are kind of cheap to throw on those Chucky seasons. I still think that Chucky is at the forefront of the horror community. Will we get a film moving forward? Again, this is confidence in a film. I would say that it needs a hit. As atrocious as that sounds, I think the remake was interesting. We now have Megan, which, shit. Now I'm reminding myself of things that Megan I'd say is house money. We're reminded of things that could be adapted for something like Child's Play. I think as far as films are concerned, it needs a hit. Otherwise, it might be stuck in streaming series purgatory. Halloween, the only OG Big 3 franchise that has kind of lasted, has something new in every single decade since it's been out. I'm gonna say too big to fail. Just like Friday the 13th, just like Nightmare on Elm Street, it's constantly at the forefront. It did very well in its re-trilogy, despite going out on a bit of a whimper, and they could go in so many different directions, and it wouldn't matter. It will still be at the forefront. Much the difference between Halloween and Jason and Freddy is we've been getting new Halloweens, despite quality, despite reception, and people are diehard for that thing. You can make the next movie have Busta Rhymes be Michael Myers, and people will still line up to go to the next thing after that. It's kind of ironclad, that franchise, for now at least. Scream, I don't know if I would say that the Scream franchise is too big to fail, because outside news and influence seems to be tainting things, despite the franchise as a whole being very strong. Like, a bad Scream movie is far better than a mid Friday the 13th movie. It's a very, very strong franchise. You know what? It kind of works for a couple of reasons. I'm putting it in too big to fail because it's another franchise that, despite having a mascot, the killers are always different. And I think even with all of the junk and the news surrounding that franchise, they could afford a misstep, which they kind of have had in the news, without putting a movie out there. 6 was kind of I mean, the next film could dictate what direction that franchise goes in, but I certainly think no matter what happens with Scream 7, we'll probably get a Scream 8. I don't know if that's the case. Like, if Friday the 13th came out and the next movie tanked, I don't know, considering how cautious they've been about. Granted, the last half decade or so, it's been in legal battles. But something like that, something like Nightmare on Elm Street, because they've been so cautious. And sure, Wes Craven has something to do with Nightmare on Elm Street, but Wes Craven also did Scream, so why is that still a part of the persistent release schedule? But I digest. Last but not least, Terrifier, otherwise known as Terrifier. Let's go ahead and put it in curtains and just call it a day. Obviously, this is a dead franchise. I'm kidding. Which of the top 2 do I put it in? Because it doesn't need a hit. It is on the uptick. This is a franchise that, if we were investing in it, if you put $1 into it, just how much of that dollar would you expect to be 5, 8, 10, 12? That's really the question. As long as they follow what they've been doing, especially with 2 and 3, I think Terrifier is too big to fail. As long as they don't get too big for their britches, I think if Terrifier, short of making Terrifier 4 for $50 million, if they maintain that limited budget and really work hard and nail it, like, these films are doing very well despite kind of being light in the story department. Again, a lot of horror franchises are like that. Don't come to me with the Friday the 13th talk. Of course, but things that slasher people go to for what they want from a horror film, they're getting tenfold from Terrifier, and it's working. It's paying dividends in so many different ways. And the highest rated, the most successful unrated film, yeah, I'll invest in that. And again, I think if the next one were to be this sloppy mess, we're getting another one after that. No shot that that's not happening. So there it is, 29 plus the 3 or 4 that I left off, and I've probably left a few more off.